Good morning, everybody. So good to see those of you who are visiting with us, as well as those of you who are regular parts of this community of faith. We're rejoiced that we can all be together today. I am in Daniel chapter 9 in my Bible, and I invite you to join me in that place as we continue our study through this wonderful book that's been teaching me and reminding me of so many lessons that I needed to hear, and hopefully you can say the same thing. As we've already seen in chapter 6, Daniel is a man who cares about praying to his God to such an extent that he's willing to die for it. He continually opens his window to pray toward the city of Jerusalem, even though he goes through a time of his life in which it was illegal to pray to anybody except to the Persian emperor. He does it anyway. James chapter 5, you might recall that in verse 16, James says that the prayer of a righteous person has great power as it is working. Remember, James said that in the context of praying for other people's sins, of confessing what you have done wrong against God, and then praying about that with somebody else who can help you with that so that you can have healing and restoration in your relationship with God. In Daniel 9, we see that very situation taking place. Daniel is a righteous person, and based on the response that he gets as this chapter moves forward, I can pretty safely say that his prayer did have great power and did work as he talked about the sins of his people and of himself. I think there's a lot to learn in this chapter about becoming righteous people, about becoming people like Daniel, and about the God that Daniel and people like him are praying to in the Old Testament. There's a lot to be said here about forgiveness and about becoming people who embrace that for themselves and people who help other people to get the forgiveness of God too. So let's open this up here in chapter 9 by just reading the first 3 verses together and then stopping and talking about that. Chapter 9 of Daniel, in the first year of Darius the son of Ahasuerus, by descent a Mede, who was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, perceived in the books the number of years that, according to the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet, must pass before the end of the desolations of Jerusalem, namely 70 years. Then I turned my face to the Lord God, seeking him by prayer and pleas for mercy, with fasting and sackcloth and ashes. Let's talk about the moments kind of leading up to this moment in the Scriptures, because to grasp the weight of what is going on in Daniel 9, we've got to start much earlier in the Bible, specifically in Leviticus 26. Within the law of Moses, I think we can see that the idea of Sabbath rest was really, really important to God, and he tried to communicate that very strongly to his people to say, I want you to rest too, in order to remember who I am, what I've created with the world, and what I did to you guys in taking you out of your slavery and your constant work in making whatever the Pharaoh wanted you to make into a land of rest. So every 7th day, the Israelites are supposed to put down their shovels and their plows and everything that they're doing in the fields and let the land rest. Every 7th year, they're supposed to not work in the fields at all and let the land rest. And then every 49th and 50th year on their calendars, they're supposed to have 2 years of rest and celebrate this festival called the Year of Jubilee. And that was a special time when slaves who were in debt and they sold themselves to other Israelites, those slaves got to go free. If you're in debt and you had to sell your land to another Israelite, that land came back to you automatically. All kinds of wonderful things happened during that year, or at least that was supposed to be the case. And because these Sabbath laws were signs to the Israelites of the covenant that they had with Him, their relationship with Him, that He was a God who uniquely provided the rest and the freedom that they knew that they couldn't get from any other Lord serving any other master. And so the way that they treated the land was supposed to reflect the robust faith that they were intended to have toward this God that they served. But yet God knew that these people wouldn't follow His Sabbath laws like He wanted them to. And so you have places like Leviticus 26, which mention the consequences of not keeping these laws. Consequences like, I'm going to take you out of this land that I gave to you. I'm going to scatter you among the nations. You're going to rot away in lands that you're not familiar with. And then the land is going to enjoy its Sabbaths as long as it lies desolate while you are in your enemy's land. But that's not the end, because you keep reading in Leviticus, and he goes on to say, if they, the people, confess their iniquity and the iniquity of their fathers in their treachery that they committed against me, if then their uncircumcised heart is humbled and they make amends for their iniquity, then I'll remember my covenant and I will remember my land. And so Daniel, in chapter 9, he is following the law of Moses in what he does to confess the iniquity and sins of the people and to say, God, I remember that you said this back in the law. Can you keep that promise, please? And, too much. In Jeremiah chapter 29, I think this is probably one of the passages that in Daniel 9, it says that he was reading. Notice there again in verse 2, Daniel is in the middle of a Bible study. He's in his chambers with the scroll of Jeremiah open before him, and he is looking at the fact that 70 years have to pass before God will take the people back. Back there in Jeremiah 25, we have a record of a letter that Jeremiah writes to the exiles in Babylon, to guys like Daniel who are already in the land captive. And Jeremiah told the people, that you're going to be there for a while. And so you're not going to go home in 2 years. You got to put down roots. You got to get married. You got to have kids. You got to work the land. You've got to seek the welfare of the city that you are put into. But God already had the end of the exile in mind, because both here in Jeremiah 29 and in 25, we see this date given of 70 years. And that might be literal, but at the very least, it is highly symbolic, because 7, whenever you read 7, or any multiple of 7 in the Bible, think completion, wholeness, fulfillment. This is how long it's going to take before whatever it is comes to pass fully. And so 70 years are there. And Jeremiah says, I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. This is one of those coffee cup verses. Plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will hear you. Daniel says in his prayer in chapter 9, we went into exile because we didn't listen to your prophets. And that's kind of ironic, because as the chapter opens, what is Daniel himself doing? He's listening to another prophet. He's a prophet, but he's listening to another prophet, and then he's praying based off of that. But here, God's promises, I will listen to you. You will pray to me after you have spurned me all these years, generation after generation. You haven't kept my law, and I put you in exile, but then you're going to pray, and I will hear you. I will visit you. And then we have 2 Chronicles 36. This is such an interesting verse. Chronicles is one of those books of the Bible that doesn't usually get a lot of attention, and it should, because it's not 1 and 2 Kings part 2. God isn't just putting extra filler in his scriptures. In Chronicles, we have especially an emphasis on the line of David and the kings of Judah. And so at the very end of that book, after all those kings have been talked about, we get the exile, a description of that, but also the reason for the exile. It mentions there in 2 Chronicles 36 that this happened to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah until the land had enjoyed its Sabbaths, its rest. All the days that lay desolate to keep Sabbath to fulfill 70 years. The Israelites hadn't owned a strip of that land themselves. That was all owned by their God. He gave it to them on lease so that they would become good tenants of it and yield their lives for Him. And so this idea of the 70-year exile, I don't think this is a random form of punishment. The covenant that they had with God was based on the idea of rest. And so He says, if you're not going to rest yourselves and give rest to the land, then I'm going to force you out and let the land rest for this symbolic length of time. And so this is all in Daniel's head, I believe, as he goes to his God in prayer after he reads Jeremiah and the 70 years. So let's look at his prayer. We've read already that he did pray, that he does pray on a regular basis. This is now an example of the kind of thing that he does pray. So chapter 9, verse 4. I prayed to the Lord my God and made confession, saying, O Lord, the great and awesome God, who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love Him and keeps His commandments, we have sinned and done wrong and acted wickedly and rebelled, turning aside from your commandments and rules. We have not listened to your servants, the prophets, who spoke in your name to our kings, our princes, and our fathers, and all the people of the land. To you, O God, belongs righteousness, but to us open shame, as at this day, to the men of Judah, to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and to all Israel, those who are near and those who are far away, in all the lands to which you have driven them, because of the treachery that they have committed against you. To us, O Lord, belongs open shame. To our kings, to our princes, and to our fathers, because we have sinned against you. To the Lord our God belong mercy and forgiveness. For we have rebelled against Him and have not obeyed the voice of the Lord our God by walking in His laws, which He set before us by His servants the prophets. All Israel has transgressed your law and turned aside, refusing to obey your voice. And the curse and oath that are written in the law of Moses, the servant of God, have been poured out upon us because we have sinned against Him. He has confirmed His words, which He spoke against us and against our rulers who ruled us, by bringing upon us a great calamity. For under the whole heaven there has not been done anything like what has been done against Jerusalem. As it is written in the law of Moses, all this calamity has come upon us. Yet we have not entreated the favor of the Lord our God, turning from our iniquities and gaining insight by your truth. Therefore the Lord has kept ready the calamity and has brought it upon us. For the Lord our God is righteous in all the works that He has done, and we've not obeyed His voice. And now, O Lord our God, who brought your people out of the land of Egypt with a mighty hand, and have made a name for yourself, as at this day we have sinned. We have done wickedly. As Daniel starts out his prayer by talking about what he and the people have done against God, I want you to notice, first of all, that he grounds this prayer in the character of the God that he's talking to. And that's paramount, because if God is not a God of faithfulness and steadfast love and mercy, then everything else that he wants to say in the rest of the prayer doesn't matter an iota, but God is the I am. I think it's really interesting that when you and I really appreciate how our translators in our Bibles help us out with this. Whenever you see the word Lord in all caps, 99% of the time, that's probably your translator telling you that that word Lord is the personal name of God, Yahweh, or I am. You remember in Exodus 3, when Moses is arguing with God about how he's really not suited, qualified, doesn't want to go be the spokesman to the Pharaoh. And one of the things that he says is, well, I mean, what am I going to say when folks look at me and say, well, who sent you? What should I call you? And God says, I'll tell you exactly what you call me. You tell them that I am sent you to the people, to the Egyptians. And so ever since that moment, the name of God, that name of God has been linked to his steadfast faithfulness to his people and his ability to rescue them from darkness. And Daniel even mentions here in the prayer, the Exodus happened because of you. Not because of any accident, not because we through an armed rebellion and just got the Egyptians out of there. No, it's all because of your steadfast love. And so within the book of Daniel, I think it's so neat. Within the entire book of Daniel, God is often called the Most High God, something along those lines. This is the only place in Daniel, in the whole book, where the name Yahweh is used. And it's used on purpose to call out the kind of God that Daniel serves. It is really important, just by way of application, that when we pray to God, that we don't immediately just launch into the list of goodies that we want to receive from God, or the list of substantial things that we want to receive or that for other people. It's important that we start out by addressing him as who he is. You remember Jesus is a great example of that in the model prayer. How does the model prayer start? It doesn't start with, give us this day our daily bread. He knows we need that. It's appropriate to pray that. But the first thing out of the gate is, our Father, who is in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And then comes can you do these things for us? Notice how Daniel does this in his prayer. He's addressing Yahweh. And notice how he says in verse 4, he begins his prayer by calling Yahweh the great and awesome God who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments. God is not a celestial Santa Claus. He loves us dearly. He wants what's best for us. But his will is what is best for us, not ours. Sometimes those two things overlap, but sometimes they do not. And we need to be okay with that. He wants our prayers to be about praise to him, not just petitions for us. So he grounds his prayer in the character of God, and then he does something that I would not have expected him to do. He speaks as one of the people, and he continually says, we and us, not they and them. This is not the first time that a man has stood as an intercessor between a group of people and God. Remember, Moses did that, but Moses used different language than this. Moses said in Exodus 32, alas, this people have sinned a great sin. They have made for themselves gods of gold. Remember, Samuel does this as well. When people ask for a king, hey, we don't want your son, Samuel, and so we want an earthly ruler to sit on the throne. And Samuel spoke to the people of what they did wrong. He says, you have done all this evil, but I won't stop praying for you. But in Daniel's language, he numbers himself with the transgressors. He doesn't hold himself to the side here. And this is just an amazing moment, because based on everything that we know about Daniel personally, do you think he was one of those guys who worshiped Baal and Asherah and Moloch and all those detestable, horrific gods that the nations around the Israelites worshipped? I don't think he did. That's a pretty safe bet. I don't think he was one of those who participated in the child sacrifices and the fertility rituals under every green tree that the prophets talk about. He seems to be a pretty upstanding guy. Obviously, he's not perfect. Nobody is. He's got his own sins to deal with. But he so easily could have just pushed away the people and said, God, I may not be perfect, but I am so much better than the losers that went into exile with me, that continue in exile with me, that are not turning themselves to you like I'm trying to do. I'm studying Jeremiah. I don't know that everybody else is. I don't know that they care about you like I do. But the tone of his prayer is not, I can't believe they got us into this mess. By one count, he identifies himself with the people 39 times in this prayer. 39 times. We have acted wickedly and rebelled. We have not listened to your sermons. To us belongs open shame. How could he say that? He wasn't even alive to see all of the generations before him and the wickedness and sin that just piled and piled and piled, leading up to his generation that actually got exiled. But Daniel says this, because this people is his people. And so, in a sense, their sins, of which his are a contribution to, are his sins as well. Sins to be prayed about, sins to be atoned for. And isn't this exactly what Jesus' cross is all about? Those of us who have heard the gospel message of salvation in Jesus Christ, isn't this what Jesus did on the cross? When Isaiah chapter 53 talks about Jesus' suffering for sin, remember Isaiah talks about how he was numbered with the transgressors. He didn't just serve humans, he became a human. He wasn't just a spirit that came down to us and hovered around and lived this nice example and taught some great things and spoke some great sermons. He became flesh. He tied himself to the human race. And then he died as a human among the humans for human sins. Our sins became his sins, not in the sense that he became a sinner and became guilty of sin, but because he chose to take on human death in order to make atonement for what we have done wrong. And so, when we think about God, there's no longer this chasm, this unbridgeable gap between him and between us, because God took on flesh, and now there's an us, because we're united with him. This is one of those places where I just want to camp and beat the snot out of an application about the way that we think about each other. When you look around this room at the other people here, do you think in terms of them, those people that I see and interact with when I get into this building, but I'm not really a part of their lives? Have you made these people your people? Is this local church just an occasional event that you attend, or is it a community that you have plugged yourself into, that you serve and that you pray for on a regular basis every day? Do you see yourself as a connected part of the sorrows and the struggles that are going on currently, that have gone on in the past, and that will go on in different ways, in different lives amongst us? Or are you a disconnected individual who is unaware and unconnected and uninvolved and happy to have it so? When you see one of your brothers and sisters here struggling mightily with sin, do you look at that individual and say, well, stinks to be you? Wow, you just made a big mess of your life. Good luck with that. Or do you draw near to that person and somehow communicate the idea of, this is something for us, you and me, to work on together. This is something we will pray about for your specific sin here, but understanding that I need as much grace that the Lord can give me as you do. Are you and I numbered with the transgressors? Or do you and I try to hold the transgressors at arm's length and pretend like we're not one of them? Do you take responsibility for sins that you didn't commit? That you didn't have a part in participating in? Problems that you didn't cause? Or do you see the problems of others as not your problem? It's so easy to do that. But considering the fact that all of us, every one of us in this room, me included, are in constant need of Jesus' grace, there is no room in a local church for self-righteous aloofness. Because we're all in the same boat. Daniel had a good mind. He had a good education. He had a good position in his culture, which wasn't even his culture. He is being recognized by all these Gentiles. He has worked in palaces, serving in front of kings, for crying out loud. But he didn't think about himself and his position as somehow separate and distinct from the people that are in exile with him. This man who fasted, put on scratchy clothing, sackcloth, sat in the ashes. This is a man who points forward to the Son of Man, who did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but instead emptied himself, taking on the form of a servant, being found in the likeness of humans. He became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross, Paul says in Philippians. We see Jesus in Daniel 9, as we do in every part of the Scriptures. So let's look at now what he asks God to do. After he spent all this time confessing his and the people's sins, notice what now his petition is. Verse 16. O Lord, according to all of your righteous acts, let your anger and your wrath turn away from your city, Jerusalem, your holy hill, because for our sins and for the iniquities of our fathers, Jerusalem and your people have become a byword among all who are around us. Now therefore, O our God, listen to the prayer of your servant and to his pleas for mercy, and for your own sake, O Lord, make your face to shine upon your sanctuary, which is desolate. O my God, incline your ear and hear. Open your eyes and see our desolations and the city that is called by your name. For we do not present our pleas before you because of our righteousness, but because of your great mercy. O Lord, hear. O Lord, forgive. O Lord, pay attention and act. Delay not for your own sake, O my God, because your city and your people are called by your name. What is interesting to me about this prayer is that Daniel is saying nothing new that he's not already read in the law and the prophets. God said repeatedly that he would exile the people because of sins, but he would bring them back at the appointed 70-year time. And so Daniel is asking God to do something that he's already pledged he was going to do. This is such a wonderful picture of one prophet studying another one, but this is also a beautiful picture of what happens when we go to God and pray. We don't pray because God is unaware of our thoughts or our needs. Psalm 139 says, even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. In fact, Jesus even says in Matthew 6, your heavenly Father knows what you need before you ask him. So, we look at passages like that and we might scratch our heads and say, well, why would I even pray to this God who is omniscient to begin with, if he already knows and if he's already said these things? Well, two things are true at the same time. And the first one is we see repeated examples like this one of eternal, omniscient God being affected by human prayer. While another thing is also true, that regardless of whether humans pray or not, regardless of what we decide to do, God has a will, and He's got plans, and He's going to make those things happen. Both somehow are true at the same time. We have to have faith in that. And so on our end, because of commands, and because of wonderful examples like this, of godly people going to God and asking for things that He's already said He's going to do, we also participate in Daniel's actions in asking God to activate His promises. And there are all kinds of promises that He's made for Christians. Maybe one of the chief ones would be He's promised to come again. After He's already come to earth and made a sacrifice for sins, He will come again a second time, a last time, and take His people home. And so for thousands of years, Jesus' people have prayed Maranatha, which means, "O Lord, come." Well, He said He's going to come. Yes, He did. But He is counting on His people, looking for Him to come and asking Him to do that. So this is a great moment to think about with prayer. Something else that we can think about with these petitions is that, it's going to come up in a minute, God's mercy and glory is the foundation and purpose for our forgiveness. So notice how Daniel makes this point. Verse 17, "For whose sake? For your own sake, O Lord. Make your face to shine upon your sanctuary." Verse 18, "Open your eyes, see what's going on, and the city that is called by your name." In that same verse, he then talks about making supplications on the basis of God's mercy, not the people's righteousness. Verse 19 now, "Delay not," for whose sake? For your own sake, because your city and your people are called by whose name? Your name. Doesn't this remind you of what Paul does in Ephesians 1, where he will say that 3 different times? He'll say that we were saved by God for the praise of His glory, or for the praise of His glorious grace. Go to chapter 1 sometime in your study and look at that. It's an important point for us, that if we're Christians, it's not because we had a spiritual leg to stand on at all, or because we had redeeming qualities, or because we are so sorry for the way that we have messed up. I mean, our sorrow is a really necessary part of God's forgiveness to us. He's not going to forgive people who are unrepentant. But it's not our sorrow that then immediately translates into righteousness. That's something that He bestows as a gift to us that we don't deserve in the least. Only God's mercy can pay for the debt that we owe, and not our own feelings about that. But this request for forgiveness, I think, raises a question, if we're careful readers in the book of Daniel. How is God going to forgive the sins of Daniel and the people? Is He just going to wave a hand over everything that they've done and say, "Okay, I've just decided to overlook all of that, so now you can go home now"? Well, that's the rest of chapter 9. And so real quickly, let's read 20 through 27. "While I was speaking and praying, confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my plea before the Lord my God for the holy hill of my God, while I was speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the first, came to me in swift flight at the time of the evening sacrifice. He made me understand, speaking with me and saying, 'O Daniel, I have now come out to give you insight and understanding. At the beginning of your pleas for mercy, a word went out, and I've come to tell it to you, for you are greatly loved. Therefore consider the word and understand the vision. 70 weeks are decreed about your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, and to atone for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. Know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of an anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. And for 62 weeks it shall be built again with squares and moat, but in a troubled time. And after the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood. And to the end there shall be a war. Desolations are decreed. And he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week. And for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abominations there shall come one who makes desolate until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. The first thing to notice about this rather confusing passage is a really clear point from the text that God is chomping at the bit to forgive the people of their sins. And so his eagerness, I think, is shown in the timing of how the angel comes to Daniel. Did you notice that? Daniel tells us twice that his prayer received an answer before the prayer was even finished. Maybe even 3 times. So verse 20, while I was speaking and praying. Verse 21, while I was speaking in prayer. And then verse 23, Gabriel is sent out as soon as Daniel starts to pray. I think that's really remarkable. So this shows us how attuned God is to what his people say. Even if it doesn't look like it from the perspective of his people. Okay, I just prayed this prayer. I've been praying this prayer for years and years. Where's God? Is he listening? Yeah, he's listening. Yes, he is acting. You just may not see it. In Daniel's case, he saw it right off the bat because there's an angel right in front of him. But God is so eager to bring these blessings that he's promised that he issues the decree as soon as Daniel begins to ask for forgiveness. He doesn't drag his feet. He doesn't begrudge the people. Yeah, well, you're right. I did say that in Jeremiah, and I did say that in Leviticus. Okay, here it is. Maybe in a couple of years. No, immediately the response is given, and Gabriel's there and explaining the future plan for forgiveness. So, what is the plan? And this is where we're going to observe the Passover on some of the details of the text. If you want to have a discussion about some more details in here than we have time to talk about, I'm happy to have that discussion. But just as a broad general view of the 70 weeks, or literally the 77s, 70 times 7, 490, gives you a hint of where we're going with that. The plan in general is you're going to go through another nasty time as my people. And yes, I'm going to deliver you, in a sense, from your oppression. You're going to get to go back home. You're going to get to rebuild. But it's going to be in a troubled time. It's going to have extra distress on top of that. You're not done with the pain yet. It's still going to happen, but there's going to be a Messiah. There's going to be an anointed one who's going to come in the mix of all of that, and he's going to save. But something that Daniel, I'm sure, had no clue about what God meant, that Messiah is also going to be cut off and have nothing. And so we understand, with the benefit of Jesus Christ in hindsight, that that's talking about the deliverance that he would bring. Because the eternal blessings of verse 23, I think it's pretty clear, have something to do with the next verse and the Messiah that is mentioned there. And so even though Daniel would not live to see it, we know who fulfilled that plan. And I'm reminded of 1 Peter when I read passages like this. Do you remember in 1 Peter 1, Peter said, concerning the salvation, the prophets who prophesied about the grace that was to be yours searched and inquired carefully, inquiring what person or time the Spirit of Christ in them was indicating when he predicted the sufferings of Christ and the subsequent glories. It was revealed to them, to Daniel, to Jeremiah, to Ezekiel, to all of these guys. It was revealed to them they were not serving themselves but you in the things that have now been announced to you through those who preach the good news to you by the Holy Spirit sent from heaven, things into which angels long to look. And lo and behold, here's an angel right in front of Daniel explaining the vision. I'm sure Daniel was one of those prophets who got revelations like this and then went back to God and said, now, what is that talking about? And God said to guys like this, it's not for you to know. You're serving somebody else. And so we get the blessings of this knowledge now, unveiled before us, and now we look toward the ultimate eternal day of Jubilee that Daniel just caught a glimpse of. We understand what these everlasting blessings are all about. And that now changes who we are now. And that's why I had Dan read Matthew 18. I want to reread a portion of what he read, and I think it's especially clear in a translation like the New American Standard. So we'll read out of that. Then Peter came and said to him, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times? Jesus said to him, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. 70 weeks, 70 sevens, 70 times 7, 490. That's how God forgave the iniquity of his people throughout all those generations. And now here is Peter saying, yeah, forgiving is hard. I don't like doing it. It's really challenging. How much what's the number? Jesus says, and essentially, the way to boil this down is to say, you forgive other people in the same way that I forgave your people. You. All the Jews and all the Gentiles and all the sins that have been racked up all of those years. I'm going to go on the cross and I'm going to write all those out with my blood. If I can do that, you can turn around to somebody who said a stinging word to you and give it up. Or whatever they did to you, get rid of that grudge. Become somebody who forgives because you serve a God who forgives. This passage is so unbelievably challenging until we put it in the context of what God did for human beings. After hundreds of years, thousands of years of unfaithfulness by everyone in the world, the gospel now goes out to the Jew first, but also to the Greek. And so despite everything that we have done wrong, God offers Sabbath rest for his people. And so your choice, if you have not yet entered into that rest, ultimately we haven't entered into the eternal yet, but if you don't have rest right now in your life, and you are still a slave to sin, please know that you don't have to serve that Pharaoh. The way has been opened. The sea has been parted. The chains have been knocked off your wrist. All you have to do is walk out of that land and receive the blessings that he wants to give you so desperately. Let him give them to you. And so if we can help you in any way, be a part of your spiritual journey, please let us know. As together we stand up, we sing the invitation song.